Welcome. My name is Josh Kwan, and I'm so happy you're with us at our webcast, brought to you today by The Gathering and the National Christian Foundation. Our topic today is the future of donor-advised funds. We'll take a look at this increasingly popular structure for philanthropy and also consider what appears to be a pattern of proposals aimed at further regulating the practice of charitable giving in America. Before we go any further, let me start with a few housekeeping notes. In the first portion of our program, we'll be listening in as a team of experts in charitable giving give us a summary of the key trends and issues of concern and opportunities for tax-advantaged giving in various reform proposals and tax plans. Then we'll conclude the latter portion of our time with an open Q&A with you, the audience, supplying the questions that you'd like our panel to address. Please note, we are not offering tax advice. We share this information so as Christian givers, we have situational awareness of the rules around charitable giving and the shifting landscape we may be facing. As a practical matter, I want to turn your attention to the row of icons at the bottom of your screen. Click on the Q&A button, and you'll be able to submit your question to the panel. Go ahead and share your question as soon as one strikes you as important. We've also collected your questions from the registration you completed, and we'll bring those into the mix as well. Lastly, our program will officially conclude at the end of the hour, and you can drop off our webcast at that time. For those who wish to stay and continue the Q&A portion, we'll gladly go on for another 30 minutes. Now to today's webcast. I have the privilege of leading The Gathering. We are a community of givers who seek to grow in our effectiveness as philanthropists, in the leadership of our families, and in the maturity of our Christian faith. We hope to steward wisely all the resources that God has entrusted to our care, from our donations and investments to our families and our influence. We are a sounding board of trusted peers, and we relish inviting thinkers and makers and writers and practitioners and artists to help stretch our imagination for how we might join God's work. Once a year, we meet in person as an entire community. And throughout the year, we host field trips and conversation groups on important matters and issues and themes, and with smaller clusters of givers, people in similar seasons of life. We organize webcasts like this one to bring our friends together to learn from one another and to hear from leaders on the front lines of loving our neighbors, sharing the gospel, and looking around the bend to see what's coming next. We have the benefit today of drawing on a long-lasting and fruitful relationship with the National Christian Foundation. I've recently gotten to know their new CEO, Dan Stroud. His official bio will tell you what you need to know about the excellence of his credentials. 25 years moving steadily into more responsibility and larger leadership roles across Nestle's global businesses in the United States and in Switzerland. What the vocational narrative can't possibly cover is the humanity I've come to know in Dan and his orientation towards his children and his grandchildren. A priority and a North Star that led him back to the United States and to the immense good fortune of everyone who cares about Christian philanthropy into the top role at NCF. Dan's story is not about a business executive switching tracks midway in life, burdened by guilt like Scrooge, or to make amends like Zacchaeus, but of a long-term commitment to the virtue of generosity being expressed in new ways. I'll make way for Dan to say hello, to speak briefly about NCF, and to introduce today's expert speakers with us.
Josh, thank you very much for those kind words. It's awesome to be with you here today. As Josh said, I'm Dan Stroud, head of the National Christian Foundation. And The Gathering and NCF actually have a long and special history with each other. In fact, the founder of NCF, Terry Parker, served on one of The Gathering's early boards. And the Gathering started to create a conversation where families could talk about ways to steward their resources wisely. And NCF is so grateful to be invited into that conversation. And we're so honored to be part of the faithfulness and passion families of The Gathering are living each and every day. Our team at NCF has helped thousands of individuals and families discover ways to create what we call today a giving strategy. And we believe that a giving strategy is based on biblical principles. It helps you give with kingdom impact. It allows you to have a meaningful legacy. And it's essential to helping you design and explore God's unique story for your generosity. Here at NCF, our mission is to mobilize resources by inspiring biblical generosity. And NCF specially is mobilizing non-cash, non-liquid gifts. And we've had the incredible benefit and an honor to work with so many families throughout the years. We've gotten to walk with them, serve them, and they have humbly chosen to partner with NCF. And through all those years, NCF has had the great privilege, humble privilege, to grant $13 billion to 63,000 charities. And it's just so humble to be part of that. And David's going to share a little bit more of those numbers with you. So on today's call, you get to hear from 3 of NCF's most qualified experts talk about, as Josh said, the future of DAFs and how you can maximize your giving by leveraging a wide variety of assets. So first of all, you get to hear from Greg Malden. And Greg serves as NCF's general counsel. He's part of the leadership team here at NCF. He leads a talented staff that is responsible for setting policies that allows NCF to fulfill our vision and mission every day. Greg is an expert in donor advised fund legislation and ensures NCF operations are in accordance with all federal and state laws. And Greg is a son-in-law of one of the gathering's longtime families. And so Greg's happy to be here as well. Second, you're going to hear from David Wills. David is a legend here at NCF. Most of you have probably heard David, but he has been part of NCF leadership for a long time, for over 2 decades, influential here. He's currently head of one of our offices in Texas, and David is an expert on the legislative environment and its impact on charitable giving. For those of you who heard him, David is a gifted speaker. He's an attorney, and he also holds a master's of biblical and theological studies from Dallas Theological Seminary. And finally, you get to hear from Jeannie Mcmanes. Jeannie is our Senior Vice President of Complex Gift Solution. She leads our team of gift planners, gift planning attorneys, and its expert and their expertise in planned gift strategies. Jeannie herself is an attorney and serves all of the NCF offices around the country. Jeannie has this unique ability to take the complex world of taxes, finances, estate planning, and outline options for maximizing giving opportunities. And besides all that she does for NCF, Jeannie has consulted with Focus on the Family, Compassion International, Young Life, and the Alliance for Defending Freedom, amongst many other places. So Josh, we are all so happy to be part of this conversation. You're going to hear from some great experts. Again, thank you for letting us be here. Looking forward to the discussion, and I will throw it back to you, Josh.
Thanks, Dan. To moderate our webcast today, we have Fred Smith. I love introducing my friend and mentor. He's the founder of The Gathering, the driving force and visionary who set our community in motion and cultivate our values. The one who's unafraid of kicking out those who violate our trust, the one whose compassionate writing welcomes a stranger, and whose original views typically prompt a moment of reflection and recognition. You'll have to come to one of our conferences to experience the engulfing bear hug that Fred is famous for, which he pairs with the lightness of prayer for his long list of friends. I'm pleased that Fred will moderate this conversation today.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our webinar on the future of donor advised funds, sponsored by the National Christian Foundation and The Gathering. You may have been reading articles in newspapers and online about some of the flurry of conversations around forcing donors to spend down their funds. 2 of the most vocal proponents of this are Houston-based John Arnold and Boston College law professor Ray Madoff, who have drafted a proposal calling for Congress to make sweeping changes to laws governing charitable donations. Charities are in a state of crisis, they write. Arnold and Madoff write in a draft of their proposal, demands on their services are greater than ever. Arnold and Madoff are calling for tax law changes that are designed to provide incentives to spur private foundations and holders of donor advised funds to give away more money faster. Their plan, called the Initiatives to Accelerate Charitable Giving, is being talked about and considered by a number of interest groups and legislators. And that's why we have convened this call with experts from the National Christian Foundation to explain more fully what the issues are and what they may well look like in the future. How will these proposals affect us? So it's my pleasure to turn us over to Greg Malden. Welcome, Greg.
Hi, everyone. Excited to connect with you. I've been at NCF for 9 years, and I was looking at the numbers, and over those 9 years, the DAF have quadrupled or maybe quintupled in every way. Number of people who utilize DAFs, the assets that are under management, et cetera. And of course, with significant growth is going to come critics. But I don't really think it's fair to refer to these folks as critics. I think the better way to describe them is DAF reformers. These are people who will readily tell you that they like DAFs, they use DAFs, they think DAFs are great. What they're really wanting to do is simply change or reform how DAFs are operated or regulated in certain respects. And so we're going to talk about that today. Now, big picture, I think it's helpful to understand that there are, I think, two major categories of these DAF reformers. The first is operating at the federal level. And this group is the ones that Fred was talking about. It's led by some law professors and some big philanthropists, but they're aided by media as well. Their goal is to get either Congress to change the laws regarding DAFs, or more likely to get the Treasury Department to change the rules and regulations for how the IRS regulates donor advised funds. That's sort of the first group at the federal level. The second group, which doesn't get as much publicity, is at the state level, particularly in California. There is an effort underway to empower the state attorney generals who have the authority generally to monitor charities and nonprofits in their individual states. But there's this effort now to empower these attorney generals with more authority to regulate donor advised funds directly. And so you're seeing these two spaces, the federal and the state, play out. And what we're going to do is we're going to sort of walk through the four areas where these regulators are largely trying to regulate. And for simplicity, I think it makes sense to think of it in terms of four categories. These DAF reformers, they want to regulate when you can give from your individual DAF, where you can give from your individual DAF, how you can give from your individual DAF, and to a certain extent, who can utilize a DAF, and sort of different rules for different users of DAFs. So what we're going to do is we're going to walk through these four things today. And the first we're going to start with the question of when. And there are three major subcategories regarding the question of timing around the use of DAFs. And you can take off the screen now, Rob. There are three areas. The first is they want to require a minimum annual payout from individual DAFs, usually 5 to 10%, somewhere in there. The second thing is they are looking to create somewhere around a 10 or 15-year cap on the time money can be put and stay in a donor advised fund. So after 10, 15 years, money should be out the door. The third is regarding death. They want a cap on the number of years after someone passes away that the money needs to be out of the DAF, which is sort of like eliminating the legacy use of a donor advised fund. So it's those three areas in terms of timing. The one that seemed to have the most traction is the first one, the 5% usual minimum annual payout rate. And what you're seeing is a lot of the donor advised funds are actually sort of making changes to their ways they operate already to mandate a 5% payout rate. Usually the rules vary a little bit, but after a year, if you haven't done it, you usually have another year or so to get it out. And if you don't, then the donor advised fund sponsor is starting to take the money and give it to usually an individual fund of the DAF sponsor, and that they will give it to whatever causes they want to support as a DAF sponsor. Now, NCF continues to believe that the timing discretion needs to be with its donors, and we're continuing to follow that path. So that's the first issue is on timing, or when, the when question. Now let's go to the second one, which is the where question. They want to regulate where you can give. This is all about pressure on donor advised funds to no longer allow grants to go to hate organizations as described by the Southern Poverty Law Center, or the SPLC. It seems like monthly now, there's some sort of media story pressuring donor advised funds to stop making grants to these hate groups. NCF is particularly pressured in this regard. Now, to this point, it's almost entirely, I would call, peer pressure, social media pressure to stop these grants. But there are signs that more could be coming. And what I mean by that is an example. about a year and a half ago, Congress held a hearing in the House of Representatives that was entitled "How the Tax Code Subsidizes Hate." And at this hearing, it was around a dozen representatives supported the idea that any charity that promotes hate um, should not have tax exempt status. And there was just a long litany of representatives criticizing the IRS for not withdrawing tax exempt status of these organizations. During the course of the discussion, 5 charities were mentioned by name as sort of deserving to be removed from tax exempt status. One of those organizations is a family-based organization that donors at NCF make grants to on a regular basis. So we obviously disagree with the SPLC's assessment of individual charities as being hate groups, and we make our own determination. But how are other DAF sponsors responding? The answer is a little bit vague and unclear. We've heard anecdotal stories from givers and from charities of stories of certain DAF sponsors not allowing grants to go to them. But I would say that's largely anecdotal. And right now, we don't really have anything other than these sort of one-off stories. There doesn't seem to be something really systematic in place, but we are continuing to watch that development closely. So those are the first 2 questions. It's the when question and the where question. Now let's get to the third question, the how question. The reformers are trying to seek to change how givers can utilize donor advised funds. And in this one, in a nutshell, what this is all about is that DAF reformers want to eliminate the ability to give anonymously through donor advised funds. And in a nutshell, what they want to require is donor advised funds to provide a complete report of which givers give to which charities. That's what they want. And to be sure, there is a lot of people pressing back against this idea that are firmly supporting donor privacy. But the reality is this idea of the government having full insight into which donors give to which charities is definitely in play. And this is particularly in play in the state of California. And I will give you sort of walk you through 2 illustrations of that. The first one is that for the last 3 years, in California, a bill has been introduced to regulate donor advised funds at the state level. What they want to do is they empower the California Attorney General to regulate donor advised funds, to demand reports, demand payouts, et cetera. And the first year, the bill didn't really go anywhere. It was opposed by sort of a large group of particularly community foundations and didn't get anywhere. But last year, it was reintroduced, and it made it out of a key committee. And so I just sort of presumed it was coming, but somewhere in the rest of the legislative procedures, it died. But it's back again. In January, the 3rd wave is coming. And so we are continuing to watch that very closely. What I wanted to do is just to give you a sense of what the thought process is for people who want to think that government needs to see this. This was the California Association of Nonprofits is actually one of the sponsors or the supporters of these bills. And they have sort of 2 primary policy reasons for this empowerment of this California Attorney General. Here's the second one and how they state it. Donor advised fund sponsors, I'm quoting, can make anonymous gifts to nonprofits without reporting any activity for individual funds. An unintended consequence of these aspects has made DAFs attractive vehicles for dark money, where huge gifts can be made without being traceable to the donor. So that's sort of the policy purpose of empowering the state to see all of this. Now, this idea of giving the Attorney General full authority to see into where donors are giving was not a new one. Back in 2010, the California Attorney General decided that if you wanted to operate a charity in California or have any involvement with California donors, the charities first had to provide a complete list of their donors to the California Attorney General. Some charities objected on First Amendment grounds, and it's a violation of the rights of my donors. We're not doing it. And it led to litigation that's been winding its way through the courts for years. At the lower court level, the court ruled in favor of the charities, said you don't have to provide your donors' names. The Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals overruled and said, no, you do have to provide your list of names to the Attorney General. Well, in January, the U.S. Supreme Court decided it was going to listen and hear arguments on this case. So this is going to be a big ruling in terms of donor privacy that's going to be issued in this summer, and most likely this summer. So we're obviously keeping a big eye on that issue. Now, the thing that's sort of particularly interesting about all of this is that the Attorney General, who was demanding the names of all the charities donors, was Kamala Harris, our current vice president. And the Attorney General who continued her practice and actually engaged in litigation with all of these charities was Javier Becerra, who has been nominated to fill one of Biden's 15 cabinet posts. So this idea that the government should have broad access to donors' names is held by people in the highest parts of government. So again, we're watching this very, very closely. Okay, so we've talked about when, where, how, and this last question is rules around who can give to donor advised funds. Now, this is a very particular issue and addresses private foundations, and that private foundations who give to and through donor advised funds. So if you have a donor advised fund, a private foundation, this is going to be particularly of interest to you. In this regard, the DAF reformers have two proposals in mind in terms of private foundations. The first is they want to eliminate the ability of private foundations to rely on gifts to donor advised funds towards their annual 5% minimum payout. So they want to cut that 5% distribution out. Second is they want to require donor advised funds to report all activity of private foundation gifts. So in a sense, they want the donor advised fund to report exactly where any money that came from a private foundation goes to. So it's sort of part of the how question I just went through. So to give you an illustration of how this is playing out, this private foundation, I picked on California. I'll pick on Minnesota for a second. So Minnesota, the Minnesota Council of Nonprofits this past October of 2020, issued this long report about private foundations utilizing donor advised funds. And they are now lobbying for the Minnesota to change its laws. And I'll read this to you. This is what they want. They want to amend Minnesota's charitable trust statute to require that private foundations report to the Attorney General where money granted into a DAF ultimately goes. This would shine light on funds that have been eclipsed from charitable trust oversight. So my personal opinion is of all these four areas, the when, where, how, and the who private foundation issue, it's this private foundation one that seems to have the most overall traction. It seems to have some traction both at the federal laws and maybe the state levels. And so if I were to anticipate something coming first, it would be in this realm with respect to private foundations. So there you have it. Those are the four areas where DAF reformers are seeking to make major changes. And I want to reiterate something I said out of the gate to close, which is that, remember, these folks are trying to improve donor advised funds. They like donor advised funds. They're just simply trying to make changes to them. And that I'll echo something that I listened to last summer in a Stanford webinar, where they looked closely at donor advised funds. And one of the Stanford professors, I think, mentioned toward the end that his opinion was that the future of DAFs is very bright and remains very bright. And I wholeheartedly agree with that assessment. So I've given you some more depth and insight around donor advised funds. And now I'm going to turn it over to David Wills, who will give you a broader view of legislative activity that could impact charitable giving as a whole. So on to you, David. Nice to see you.
Thanks, Greg. Before I do that, I just want to say a couple of things about the value of the gathering and its relationship to NCF. The gathering, from my perspective, is like a big family community of generous people who love to spur one another on to love and good deeds. And they are really looking forward to the next time they can get back together, because they're like a big family that needs to be face to face with each other. And so I know that Zoom is about as good as we can do right now, but the day is coming where we will all be in a hotel together, experiencing the community, the gathering. NCF has had, as Dan mentioned, a very, very important relationship with the gathering from very early on, because we know that every family that experiences the ministry of the gathering increasingly excels at the grace of giving. Last year was a great year for NCF, and many, many people that are on this call or that are part of the gathering were a part of that. So I just wanted to give you a little update on what happened last year. My mom tells me that I remind her of Karl Rove. I'm going to choose to receive that as a compliment, though I've never confirmed with her if it was or not. So I have my Karl Rove whiteboard here, and I just want to show you guys what happened last year at the National Christian Foundation. Hope you can see my whiteboard. The contributions last year were $2 billion, which is just amazing. $1 billion of it was non-cash, and as Dan Stroud mentioned, 500 million were business interest and real estate type gifts. On the grant side, it was equally amazing. There was 1.33 billion in grants last year to over 28,000 organizations, almost 275,000 grants that went out. And I just want to celebrate that because many of you that are on this call have had some influence on those numbers. Of course, all those numbers are really a reflection of people. They are the people that that give. And hang on 2 seconds here. You can take that slide down, I think. They're the people that give and the people that also are the recipients of that generosity. I do want to I just have this feeling that Terry Parker's lurking somewhere on this call, in the Zoomosphere, and it really can't be overstated the importance that Terry's had in both of these organizations. And I know that he is very thankful that we're having this joint effort with the gathering today. And so now I'm going to move on to the fun stuff. Actually, it's not the fun stuff, but it's the stuff that Fred asked me to talk about. And I do spend a fair amount of my time dealing with the world of Washington, D.C., and trying to influence our representatives and senators and their staff towards being favorable to philanthropy and charitable giving. So here's an update on what's going on. And the first one I want to mention is hot off the press. It is the UGPRRA Act. Try to say that 3 times real fast. The Universal Giving Pandemic Response and Recovery Act is going to be introduced on Tuesday of next week. We just got our first Senate Finance Committee Democrat co-sponsor. That is Cortez Masto from Nevada. She has just joined on as a co-sponsor of the bill. One of the things that this bill does is it expands the universal charitable deduction. Currently, a couple filing jointly can deduct $600 of their charitable giving if they don't itemize. So it's universal charitable deduction. This bill is going to take that number from $600 to $8,000, which is going to have a significant impact on charitable giving. If you're following charitable giving statistics, you know that it's been a struggle in many ways. It's not growing as it should be. And this is just one way that could be helpful. In addition to that, we love the universal charitable deduction because the more people that experience benefit from the charitable deduction, the more likely we are that those benefits are going to stick around for a long time. Okay, now let's jump to the Biden administration and some of the things that I think you can see on that slide. So we are day 44 of the Biden administration, not that I'm counting. And the signals are crystal clear with regards to legislation, with regards to taxes. And that is that they basically want to eliminate everything that's happened in the last 4 years. If they could, they would just wipe it all off and they would go back to the last day of the Obama administration and Biden would step in as the president because there's unfinished work that they did not finish in those 8 years. They want to unwind the past 4 years and then start from there and move forward. Here are some things that I think have a better than 50-50 shot of happening this year. And then I'm going to kind of go less than 50% and then far less than 50%. Here are the ones that I think got at least a 50% shot. Number one, it all has to do with the Tax Cut and Jobs Act. I think that they would love to repeal 98% of that act would be my guess. So here's what you can look for. Income taxes are going to go up. They're going to take the 37% rate. That's the highest rate right now. They're going to move it back to the 39.7%. Now, believe it or not, that's for incomes over $630,000. But that hits more people than you might imagine. The next one is the increase in the capital gain and qualified dividend tax rate. It's 15% today. And it's 0% for some people at a lower level of earnings, and they want to take it to a 20% level back to where it was before. They also want to increase long-term capital gain tax rates. Currently it's 20%. They want to move it to the 39.6% level. This is going to have huge implications on one of the things that Dan mentioned with regards to the sale of real estate and business interests. That essentially they want to double the long-term capital gain tax rate. And then they want to increase the corporate tax rate from from 21% it is today to 28% going forward, just taking it back. But they also want to do something new. They want to put in a 15% minimum tax on corporations that earn more than $100 million. This is a new way to not allow corporations to make deductions that take their tax rate below 15%. I would say, let me go ahead and before I give you my spin on the charitable, how this is going to impact charitable giving, let me give you a couple of them that I think are less than 50%. So that means that I think it's unlikely this will happen this year, but I think it is very possible that they could happen next year, even though it is an election year. So it gets tougher. This is the year where they can really get stuff through. And the first one is involving the gift and estate tax. So there's an exemption and a tax rate that are relevant here. And they want to, currently the exemption is, let's say it's about 11.6 million per person at this point. And it's going to reduce automatically under the current law by 50% in 2025. And that year is now starting to get really close. So it'll drop to about 6 million in 2025 anyway. Biden wants to take it to 3.5 million per person right now. And he wants to increase the rate from what it is 40% now. He wants to bump it up to 45%. This, of course, will massively increase the number of people who will be susceptible to the estate tax and gift tax that are not even susceptible to it at all. Another issue in this realm is he would like to eliminate the step up in basis that people receive. So when you pass on wealth to something that is a capital asset to someone else, they get it at their basis is the fair market value of when you passed it on. I'm oversimplifying this a little bit. He wants to eliminate that so that people that receive things in inheritance take the basis of the person that's passing it on, which is often extremely low. And that essentially is a tax increase. It greatly increases the cost of selling any of those assets. So what does this mean for charitable giving? And I'm going to mention a few more things, but crazy enough, as tax rates go up, the cost of giving goes down. The cost of giving $1 is less when you have higher tax rates. So people who are highly charitable are less impacted by these tax rates than people that aren't charitable at all, which makes perfect sense. Unfortunately, these tax rates over a longer period of time cause the economic situation to diminish. So household wealth, which is one of the key indicators of charitable giving, will diminish because of these. So in a relatively short period of time, it will have a hit to charitable giving. So that's a few things. A couple of other things that are important in Biden's budget. He has something in his budget that Obama had in all 8 of his budgets, and that is a cap of 28% on the charitable deduction. So right now, effectively, your higher marginal tax rate is effectively the cap on your deduction. So it's probably, for people on this call, 32 to 37%. Biden wants to cap that at 28%. It's very unlikely that Obama was never able to achieve that, and I don't think that Biden will as well. There's another thing that Biden thinks is really important that I think is going to happen this year, and that is with regards to who can and cannot itemize their deductions. So currently, people who can itemize their deductions pay much less for giving $1 because they get to leverage the charitable income tax deduction. But right now, state and local taxes are capped at $10,000, and other things have happened that have caused the number of people to itemize to go from over 30% of the people to 17%. And that means that about half the number of people in America still have the same cost of giving. So the cost of giving $1 has gone up for about 15% of the people in the US. And when the cost goes up, the giving goes down. It just works that way. He wants to repeal the SALT cap, which will effectively allow more people to itemize that currently do. They won't want to take the standard deduction if they can deduct all of their state and local taxes. Hope that makes sense. Finally, again, the impact on charitable giving, especially on that one, the more people that can itemize and take advantage of the charitable deduction, the more giving is going to go up. But look, the reality is that we're in a very unusual time where the economic environment continues to go up, but the tax environment is getting really, it's kind of like quicksand right now. What that means is it's time to plan. And because we know those who are well-planned give more and they give more wisely. And so I'm going to let Jeannie come on and give us some tips on tax-wise planning in light of not just these changes, but even some things that are already current. Jeannie, take it away.
Great. David, Greg, everybody, thank you so much for joining us here today. So that's a lot. That's a lot going on when we think about what Greg is helping us kind of see the landscape that may be ahead, David as well. But we know the author and the Lord of the resources that we've been entrusted to steward. So there are still some fantastic opportunities, some encouragement to each of you on the line as you think through and pray through, what the year ahead might be for you and your stewardship journey. So as you could hear David saying, I think the big news this year is transactions and tax deductions. So while we're waiting to see how some of these things actually play out, as David mentioned, and we're hearing from investment bankers and mergers and acquisition groups and private equity groups around the country that transactions may indeed be at a very fast pace this year. They may be up in terms of business sales, business succession plans. People are hot to make those changes before those potential tax increases hit, maybe next year, even down the road. And the other thing is tax deductions. So while increases in taxes are looming ahead, we still have some good news this year. So on December 27th, the Consolidated Appropriation Act of 2021 was enacted, and it extended the CARES Act for us as well. So, but before we dive in to kind of unpack a little bit about what that can mean for you and your giving this year, let's remind everyone that the ordinary charitable deduction limits are still in play. And so as a reminder for everyone on the call, the current lay of the land, the law in force, is that givers can give up to 60% of their adjusted gross income in the form of cash gifts to the charities they love to support in their donor advised funds. So just as a reminder, AGI, I know we're not at April 15th yet, but many of us are working on our tax paperwork. That adjusted gross income is that number on the bottom of page 1 of your tax return that includes all of your source income, not just your paycheck, but your investment income, your pass-through income from the companies you may own. And so folks can actually, send checks to their favorite charities. And it doesn't just have to be checks. That column over on the right-hand side talks about how up to 30% of your income, your AGI, you can deduct in the form of asset-based gifts. So if you gave a 2% interest in your company or 40% of your investment property, the value of that gift could be deducted against your income each year, up to 30% of that amount, with the remainder of that being in cash gifts. So that is still in play and an opportunity that we encourage folks to take advantage of this year to the extent it is in alignment with your giving passions and your gift planning. All right, so with that in mind, what can the CARES Act do for us on top of or in addition to that? Well, the CARES Act, which was in place last year and has been extended through the end of this year, allows taxpayers to deduct charitable gifts up to 100% of their income. So when you're thinking about what your income picture might look this year, this is a great opportunity for you to accelerate your giving and to maybe even wipe out your federal income taxes to the extent you front load your giving in a year where you can fully deduct it. Now, I'll remind you, you can see on the bullet points in front of you, these are for cash gifts only, directly to churches, charities, or something called a single charity fund that you can set up at NCF or at another donor advised fund provider perhaps. But the idea of that is it's an account that is set up for the benefit of a single charity. And at least at NCF, you can still retain the advisory privileges to say the when and the how much the grants go out of that account to the specific charity you've indicated. Gifts of cash under the CARES Act also exclude gifts to private foundations and donor advised funds. The amount you can deduct under the CARES Act is reduced by the other gifts you've made, perhaps to private foundations, donor advised funds, or asset-based gifts, so that in total, you can deduct your charitable gifts this year up to 100% of your income. To the extent your giving exceeds 100% of income, you can carry forward any extra charitable giving deduction into future years. So, all right, that's a lot of words. Let's see if we can put them together with a visual that can help you kind of, how does it work? Well, the bottom portion of your screen there are the ordinary income tax laws that have already been in play. And then the top portion of your screen there shows you how the CARES Act can sit right on top of that to take some all the way to 100%. Should they choose to. This is what you can do. Of course, it's between you and your financial advisors, your strategic planning around finances, business succession, and estate planning, and certainly most importantly, your stewardship journey plan on what you actually want to do this year. But you can gift, in theory, up to 30% of your income this year in the form of an asset-based gift. And the good news is that doesn't necessarily, hit your cash flow. Then you can make an additional 20% gift, including of your income, to your donor advised fund, should you choose to. And the remaining 50% of deduction opportunity this year could once again be in the form of cash gifts directly to churches, public charities, and single charity funds set up for those types of nonprofits. Even still, when we look at that, you might be sitting there thinking, that sounds like a great opportunity, but hitting that can be a challenge. That 100% AGI can still be a challenge when we're only looking at our checkbook. Where can we go find other resources that would still allow us to take advantage of this? Well, if we're trying to find additional cash, so to speak, not only do we look at the checkbook, I would encourage you to take a moment and think about retirement plans, maybe stock options that you've acquired over the year. These are tax deferred assets. And if you're over 70 and a half with the retirement plan, if you withdraw from your retirement plan, or if you exercise certain types of your stock options, typically that'll result in a taxable income event to you. Well, under the CARES Act, if you withdraw that, it increases your adjusted gross income. And then in theory, you could turn around and give cash gifts to churches, charities, or single charity funds. And on your federal taxes, at least, the income recognition would be wiped out by your tax deduction. That's a lot of words, but for the giver on the line who would look around at the needs around them in today's world and would love to accelerate their giving, they've already worked with their advisors and they know that they have excess resources that they're not going to need for estate planning and retirement income needs. This is a tremendous opportunity to maybe withdraw some of those retirement plans, those stock option exercise plans, accelerate them this year. Yes, that's taxable income, but they can turn around and take those liquid proceeds and make gifts that are fully deductible on the federal return. So 2 important call outs. I've been talking federal taxes. You need to consult your state law matter on this as well, because not all states have adopted the CARES Act approach. And then also make sure you're working with your financial advisors and your tax advisors and your estate planners to be sure that this is an acceleration of your long-term plans and not a disruption. Certainly life insurance cash value is another opportunity for folks once you've worked around with your advisors. So those are just some suggestions on how you can take advantage of another unique year in the world of philanthropy with the tax laws that we know that are currently in place. With that in mind, I know we'd love to hear from you and some of your questions. So I'm going to invite Fred to come back on and join us. And then we're delighted as a group of panelists here to all come on board and field your questions. Thanks so much.
That's great, Jeannie. Thank you. I've been fielding some questions while the panelists have been talking. And so I'm going to throw those out. I'm not going to direct them to any single panelist. Y'all can decide who's the best person to answer these, okay? So this question is from David Wills to David Wills. No, seriously. Will DAFs remain qualified recipients of distributions from private foundations?
Yeah, so that was one of the last of the 4 categories I was looking at. That is one of the changes that is being looked at both the federal level. That there's an effort to reform the rules that would not allow the 5% to count as far as distributions being made to donor advised funds. Now, of course, you could give. It's not like they're going to disallow or not allow grants to donor advised funds. It just wouldn't count towards the 5%.
Got
But
it.
Again, we don't know if it's going to happen, but that is one of the things that's on the table.
Yeah, Fred, I'll jump in just real quick on follow up. So I called some folks this morning that are in DC that are kind of who we're connected with that have their ear to the ground. And I asked them specifically about that question. And they said that with regards to all the DAF legislation issues, that it is gaining some traction in the charitable sector, primarily because the Chronicle of Philanthropy supports these things, but on the Hill, they're hearing nothing at all. It's crickets. And one of the reasons they said is that is that the Democrats are very unlikely to do any of these things because it would divide their sector. And right now it's critical. They have such a thin margin in the House and the Senate. They can't afford to divide their sector really for any reason that's not critical. And so their view is that we got to take it seriously. We need to do a better job of responding to these concerns, but it's unlikely that it's going to make its way onto the Hill.
And David, sorry to keep going, but sort of evidence of that, in 2017, a notice came out from the Treasury regulations about potential changes in terms of donor advised funds and private foundations and sort of the mix there. And it's been almost 4 years and they still haven't issued anything. So there's something that's sort of holding things up in this area.
Jeannie, anything you want to add to that?
No, I'll let these two guys with their ears to Capitol Hill, Washington, answer those.
I know a number of NCF clients and gathering participants give directly out of their required minimum distribution. And one of our questions is, do you see any chance that there will be legislation that will allow people to give from their RMD directly to a donor advised fund?
Good question. I haven't seen anything around legislation and allowing them to go directly to the donor advised fund. What I didn't mention is that you can still do the qualified charitable distribution, the QCD, just like you have been in years past. But once again, that goes directly to charities, churches, or even a single charity fund. A lot of our givers, Fred, have set up single charity funds at NCF to receive those qualified charitable distributions.
So you want to say a little bit more about that, Jeannie? What is a qualified charitable fund? Is it like an area fund or what?
Yeah,
what is
a single charity fund is actually, there's a definition called a single identified organization fund right there in the Internal Revenue Code defining what a donor advised fund is and what it isn't. And so at NCF, a giver could set up, one or more accounts or funds at NCF that are for specific charities. So let's say I love to give to my church and these 4 charities, and I know that I love to give to them. I can set up a fund for each one of them. I can direct my CARES Act cash contribution or my IRA QCD to that fund. And I still have the joy of saying when and how much I recommend grants go to that charity. Unlike a DAF, I can't change the charity, but I can still be involved in the when and how much I want those checks to go bless my church.
Great. I've got a question here. It says, and this is probably for all 3 of you, when you refer to current year, are you referring to 2020 or 2021?
I'm referring to 2021, the year ahead.
Okay.
Same.
Good. Got a question here. It says, what are your thoughts about the possibility, and you may have covered this, but y'all have covered so much material this afternoon. What are your thoughts around the possibility of the IRS requiring a specific percentage of funds per year to be granted? And what do you think the percentage would be that would be imposed as an annual requirement? I guess that's almost a 2-part question. 5% is, from my understanding, is an arbitrary number from 1969, and that's probably changeable. But what do you see in the future for the requirement for DAFs as well as private foundations?
Well, for DAFs, this may be the key desired reform, is to require a minimum annual 5% or so payout. If you listen to the speakers of this view or you read their articles, it's like a drumbeat. But the evidence is very strong opposed to that, because the 5% figure comes from the private foundation world, and the donor advised world, the average payout rate is 20% or so. And NCF, it's I think 35%. So I mean, we're just way ahead of that 5% figure. So, I mean, it's one of those arguments that you're like, why do we need it? It's actually not needed. In fact, the current method is way better. So that's a pretty strong counter argument. And so I think, I really do think, kind of like David was saying, I just think that argument is currently the prevailing view.
David?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. I think that it's very unlikely. You remember John Boehner? Does that name ring a bell?
Oh, sure.
Used to be the chair of the Ways and Means Committee. Way back then, they were trying to figure out whether or not donor advised funds should require a 5% payout. And that was really the closest that we ever got to that really actually potentially happening. And it really didn't get very close. And it was bipartisan at that point. It's not bipartisan anymore. I would say that it's a less than a 5% chance that a 5% per fund requirement would ever happen. I'd say 0, but that's foolish, and I'm kind of foolish anyway, but I'm not going to say 0. If there is a compromise and there is some type of a payout requirement, it will be an aggregated 5% of the entire organization that's sponsoring the donor advised funds. When Greg mentioned the 20% and NCF's 35%, he's talking about an aggregate payout of all of our funds together. Some of them are 100% in a given year, and some of them are 0 in a given year. But aggregated together, it's about, we go through all of it about every 3 years. Is the way it just kind of circulates through. With typical other sponsoring organizations, it really circulates about every 5 to 6 years. And so it's very different than how a private foundation, it's just not an endowment type of an environment. And most private foundations are they think of themselves more of an endowment, long-term. We're gonna give away the growth. Donor advised funds just don't function like that generally.
This may be a follow-up question for David. I always tell people, don't bring facts to a feelings fight. And so much of this is around misrepresentation or emphasis on the bad boys who've done things. And David, you're very familiar. I think you told me it was 10 or 20 years ago that the Boston Globe did a series of exposés on the abuses of private foundations. And that got a lot of press, and Senator Grassley's committee started to work on it. I hate to use the word witch hunt, but do you see something like that happening now in the press and the media?
Well, that happened in 2005 is when that series came out. And the response to that series was a much robust coalition of advocates in Washington on behalf of charities. That's really what happened. That was what happened when those articles came out. And there were a lot of facts in those articles, but there was also, there was some sketchy stuff as well. Little fake news every once in a while to pepper it out a little bit. But again, we have seen other situations and other stories where some are positive, some are negative. And with regards to this particular issue, it's unlikely that there's going to be something like what the Boston Globe did. I do know that probably Madoff and Arnold would love to get at that level, but that's my feeling. Greg, you got a thought?
Nope, I agree with you.
Okay. We've got a number of technical questions that are coming across, and I think what we'll do with those is at the end of this session, we're going to post some email addresses for people to contact NCF or the resources directly. So some of those technical questions, maybe we can handle that way, but there's a couple that might have a broader application. Here's a question from California. Will deductibility of state taxes return with increased personal rates? David or Greg, Jeannie, who wants to handle that one?
I'll take that one. I think that if the rates do go up, the salt the tap on the salt will go away.
Okay. Here's another.
The salt thing, interestingly enough, is one of Biden's top things that he wants to get rid of that. He thinks that it was a mistake. And frankly, most people on both sides of the aisle think that that was a mistake. So that one has the highest, in my opinion, likelihood of occurring. I think it's more likely that happens than the rates go up.
Okay. Jeannie, you're out in front of people all the time. And one of our participants asked, does NCF have a position statement on this issue that they can use as kind of an elevator speech? Other than we're against it. I mean,
right.
Is there, Yeah.
With respect to where we think legislation may happen or where the reforms around donor advised funds may happen, we do not. Now, really, that's Greg. I don't think we have one, nor do I think one is in the works. Is that correct?
That is correct. That would be a change, an approach for NCF to get involved in that sort of lobbying type role.
We historically have waited until, actual tax law is in place and then rapidly moved in force to help givers navigate those laws. But
In the California legislation that's out there, I toyed with the idea of getting involved, but the reality was that the community foundations and Schwab, who's based in California, they really sort of stepped up and represented what I would say are our interest. And so far, they've been successful. And we sort of just monitored it on the side, what's going on.
We have a number of people that belong to Philanthropy Roundtable, as well as Council on Foundations and Generous Giving. And one of the questions is, Philanthropy Roundtable has been very active in advocacy. Are there ways that people can get involved in advocacy?
Absolutely, there are. So one of the things that happened from the Boston Globe stories is that we created the Alliance for Charitable Reform, which was an arm of the Philanthropy Roundtable. We now, just in the last 6 months, have pulled that more inside the Philanthropy Roundtable to make it much more integral to the Roundtable's actions. And so at this point, if anybody wants to get involved in the advocacy, I would encourage them to either become a member of the Philanthropy Roundtable or to go to the Roundtable. They have a really solid effort on advocacy, and that's the place to go to get involved. We also have created the Faith and Giving Coalition. I'm pretty sure there's a website for that. It's really a broad range of faiths that have common purpose with regards to charitable giving and tax legislation. So that's the second place to look, the Faith and Giving Coalition.
Great. Greg, anything you want to add, or Jeannie? Okay. This is a semi-technical question from one of our participants. Is a charitable remainder trust considered a private foundation?
it is not. It is a distinctly different type of charitable giving arrangement under the Internal Revenue Code. So the rules that do apply to private foundations, some of them also apply to charitable remainder trusts, but they are distinctly different. So yeah, with that in mind though, as I'm trying to think what might be behind that question, gifts to charitable remainder trusts, don't fall under the CARES Act and the ability to give cash. It really does need to be directly to the 501c3 church, nonprofit, or single charity fund created for them.
So a charitable remainder trust during the life of that trust, it actually makes payments to the donor as opposed to making grants to charities primarily.
That's right.
But it does have some similarities. It does take in assets. It does make a minimum, sort of like a minimum requirement every year, and it's usually kind of close to 5%. So it can kind of feel like a private foundation, but it actually almost works in reverse.
That's right. Yep. And people tend to use charitable remainder trusts when they're getting ready to sell an asset with a lot of capital gain associated with it. That's a typical use for it, but yeah.
Well, thank you, everyone. This has been great. We want to thank all the panelists, especially welcome to Dan at NCF. And we're grateful for the long and solid, good relationship with NCF and the gathering. So I'm going to turn it over to Josh. And Josh, you're up.
I'm going to ask those panelists to stay on for just a little while longer. I just want to, in conclusion, for those who need to depart from our webcast at the end of this hour, if you have any questions, comments, feedback for us, you can reach me at my email address, josh@thegathering.com, and direct questions if you have them for NCF. Sarah will be your point of contact, Sarah Turner, and she's at, you can see her email address in the chat box. The National Christian Foundation has 26 offices around the country. Many of you on this webcast have accounts. You can check into your local office with your questions. And those of you who want to inquire about opening an account, you can reach out to the national office if there isn't a local office near you. I'm thankful for David, Greg, and Jeannie for your time and sharing your expertise. We're going to stay on for a little longer as long as there are additional questions, and then we'll wrap up in the next 25, 30 minutes. Okay, thanks so much. Fred, I'm going to ask you to come back so that you can continue moderating the chat here.
Actually, my contract only runs until the top of the hour. But so this is extra. David, would you negotiate for me?
Yes, I will. Absolutely. The check's in the mail.
All right. What is, here's one. What is the California bill name and number? I think, Greg, that one's for you.
Yeah, so the current bill number for 2021 is 1353. That's California Bill 1353. I'll just read this for folks that might be interested. The current bill reads, this bill would express the intent of the legislature to enact legislation that would relate to donor advised funds for the purpose of improving accountability of charitable giving. I will say as well that the prior two bill numbers for that would probably be of interest. I can't remember which was first. I think the first one was 1712. 1712, I think, was back in 2019. I think 2020 was Bill 2956. So it's 1712, 2936, excuse me, and then the current bill, which is 1353.
Great, thanks, Greg. Here's one. Can existing funds in an NCF donor advised fund be designated to a single charity fund, or does it have to be new money?
Absolutely, they could. The question would be, what goals are the giver pursuing? Because in a donor advised fund, the fund advisor can choose which charities, to when, and how much they want to recommend grants be made. When they move that from a donor advised fund over into a single charity fund, they still can make recommendations on the when and how much, but they've locked and loaded for a single charity. There are reasons why some people might do that, but frequently, so yes, money can move from a donor advised fund to a single charity fund, but we would want to be sure to have a conversation with someone to know what their goals were and if that was in their best long-term interest for their giving strategy.
Yeah, Fred, one of the goals that I've had several folks do that, the reason they've done that is because they actually want to fundraise from other people into a particular fund for a particular charity. So they are serving on the board of a charity. They want to set up a single charity fund for that charity. They seed it with a contribution from their donor advised fund, and then they make other people aware that you can contribute into this single charity fund, which is kind of like a foundation for the charity.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Excellent
Good.
point.
Here's a question from one of our participants, California participants, who has not moved to Texas or Florida yet. With all the uncertainty of DAFs and foundations in the US, should we look at any international long-term vehicles?
I
Greg?
would say I'll answer that question this way. We try to think as creatively as possible and try to plan ahead as much as possible. And so we are thinking about a lot of different things, but right now there's no plans to do sort of an international operation.
Okay. A question. Have any states allowed donors to follow the 100% CARES giving?
I'm not aware of any.
I'm not either. In fact, since we've been talking so much about California, that's a state that I actually work with a lot of families in, and I'm always very cautious because if you do that 100% AGI and you withdraw from, your retirement plan or you take exercise stock options, California still wants to tag a 13.3% on that if you're in the highest tax bracket. So please note, careful note, we've been talking about federal income tax opportunities on this call today.
Okay. This is a question about the IRA and RMDs. Is the $100,000 charitable gift from a retirement account at age 70 and a half affected by any of this proposed legislation?
Oh, the current law, it hasn't been affected. You can still do that $100,000 in lieu of RMD. That's called a qualified charitable distribution. David, have you seen anything in the future type bills? No. Mm-mm.
No. Well, I mean, there have been attempts to start to allow that to go directly into a donor advised fund as opposed to a single charity fund that we've been talking about. We've tried that half a dozen times and we've never made it over the finish line, but have got very close a couple of times. But currently, no, that's not in the works right now.
Great, thank you. Here's a question. Does NCF, what do you think about making loans to nonprofits and for-profits with a mission?
Well, we've done that sporadically over the years. And the way it effectively works is it's sort of a zero interest loan or a low interest loan, I think. And if it's not paid back, we convert it into a grant. But I would say we've done that 20 times in my 9 years, something like that.
I would emphasize, Greg, that's the case when it's a charity, an actual nonprofit. If it's a for-profit with a missional purpose, which I think was the second part of your question on that, Fred, if I heard you correctly, we would, recommend strategic partners who vet that as part of their charitable purpose, or we do have planning vehicles inside NCFs, something called a supporting organization, where if it's going to be done at a high degree of volume, the way I describe it is like on the HGTV channel. Do you want to hire an expert and send a grant to, a friendly ministry that's what they do every day because they're the experts in vetting those and handling all of the IRS reporting? Or are you going to do enough volume that you want to get the know-how and the systems and the tools in place? And then NCF has a platform for that with our supporting organization services.
It's great. Assuming the estate tax exemption is reduced, either by expiration of the current law in 2025 or intervention by current administration or Democrats sooner, it's my understanding that the current exemption is supposed to be grandfathered. What's the risk of that getting overturned?
That's outside of my knowledge.
If I'm understanding the question, like if you want to execute gift and estate type planning transactions this year under the current law, and then the hope is that future legislation would grandfather transactions that have already occurred under the current law, I would think the chances of that are very high. David, you can speak into that, but if they're going to make a sweeping change, transactions that happen this year under the current exemption are most likely to be honored, I would think, or that would be a hotbed of political discourse.
No, they would typically not make those retroactive.
Right. So for those who hadn't completed their gift and estate tax transactions before, this recent election, they might want to get on it and talk to their professional advisors about the wisdom of doing those transfers this year using the gift tax exemptions, which are still north of 11.58 after being adjusted, 11.58 million per person after being adjusted for inflation.
Well, Jeannie, let me make our last question then a follow-up with you on that. And the question is, will there be an opportunity to make changes to our DAF or give from the DAF before new laws take effect?
Changes.
In other words, how prepared should we be?
I think that the lay of the land that we have in play right now is the situation where we make our best decisions around our charitable giving strategies. So for givers today who are thinking about how do I want to accelerate my giving in a still favorable tax deduction environment, they need to be working with their planners to determine, how much can they do to pursue their stewardship journey. And then we will adjust to what's coming down the pike, whether it's towards the end of this year or in the next few years. My friend and colleague Greg Sperry says, right, you make hay while the sun's shining. So take advantage of what's still here, in my opinion.
Greg?
I have sort of maybe two ideas, and I'm not really sure what was behind the question. But if your concern is donor anonymity, I think one thing that you could do, it's a simple thing that may be effective, is to change the name of your fund to just be a generic name. So instead of saying the Greg and my wife's name's Katie, the Greg and Katie Malden Fund, we would name it, say, the Isaiah 41 Fund. And so any else, that might be a way to prevent ultimate reporting out to the government if that's ever a requirement. The other thought I've had is really with respect to private foundation. I think something that NCF could do is to ensure that the granting instructions on file for any money that comes from a private foundation mirror the grant purposes of the private foundation, so that there's evidence that the money that's going out is in keeping with the private foundation purposes.
That's great. Well, Josh, I'm going to turn it back over to you to conclude our time.
Great, thanks, Fred. And once again, thanks to our friends at NCF, in particular, the lovely David Wills, Greg Malden, and Jeannie Mcmanes. This is fantastic. I think it's been very useful. And I know that you continue to do research and follow the trends and all along the way. And you have a wonderful newsletter that you send out every week to some 40,000 subscribers who care about Christian philanthropy. I encourage all of our viewers to subscribe to that, to keep tabs of what's happening, both from a legislative perspective as well as, again, one of the distinctions of the National Christian Foundation as it relates to DAS is that you highly encourage givers to actually make grants out of those funds. Whereas I think some other service providers, they make money when they collect fees and sort of make a percentage of assets under management. So I encourage people to pay attention to what National Christian Foundation experts are saying. Reach out to your local advisors, and we'll say thank you. And we're going to continue a series of webcasts. Let us know what you think if you want us to continue these, especially around the issues around the mechanics and strategies of charitable giving. So thanks a lot and have a great day.